Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar and expert KOL roundtable organized by PHAXIAM Therapeutics. I would like to inform you that this is an interactive session and you will be able to ask your questions at the end of the presentation through a chat system that is at the bottom of your screens. I now hand over to the management team of PHAXIAM. Thibaut, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dushan, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this conference call, whose objective is to present how the recently evolving strategic context for phage is introducing new opportunities for PHAXIAM. Just for your information, this presentation will be recorded, then published on the IR page of our website in the upcoming days, and a press release detailing the most important points presented in this webinar has just been released. Before starting, as usual, I'd like to draw your attention to the disclaimer to remind you that today's call includes forward-looking statements. And as you know, they all involve risk and uncertainty that could cause actual timings and results to differ materially. Switching now to our agenda of this webinar. First of all, a presentation describing the new strategic context for phage and its impact on PHAXIAM strategy. Following this presentation, a 40 minutes panel with KOL coming from France, Germany, UK, and Switzerland. And these KOL are to give us their point of view regarding the critical need for individualized phage treatment in their respective countries. And before a final conclusion, we will have a 20-minute slot dedicated to Q&A to the management. I'm here with Pascal Birman, our Chief Medical Officer, and Jérôme Bailly, PHAXIAM Chief Technical Officer. And we will perform this presentation, three of us, and we'll answer your question at the end of the panel. In this presentation, I would like to comment four major strategic items. First, major regulatory change are occurring and impacting the phage therapy landscape. Second, in 2025, PHAXIAM is to initiate a new positioning in a complementary market channel to medicinal product in order to generate shorter-term revenues. Third point, we maintain, of course, our ambition to obtain a conditional market approval upon completion of the Gloria trial. This conditional market approval expected still in 2027. And based on all these developments to be presented today, PHAXIAM could reach operating profitability and positive cash flow in 2027. Now, if we start, there is clearly a fast emerging, large targeted addressable market in Europe and in the US for phage. And the rationale relies on very important increasing unmet medical need. A very recent publication from the Lancet journal, updated in September 2024, disclosed that in Europe and in the US, around 550,000 patients per year are dying of severe resistant bacterial infection, and of which 250,000 in Europe only. Furthermore, the same publication indicates that on the same territory, Europe, US, 8.4 million of patients experience every year unresolved severe resistant bacterial infection, being considered as difficult to treat infection, and related incidence is also significantly increasing. And if we consider what we call SKP pathogen, the seven most common pathogen representing around 55 to 90% of severe resistant infection, phage targeted addressable market amounts to around 600,000 patients, coming from both patient subpopulation, death patient, and difficult to treat patient. And in Europe, more specifically, phage targeted addressable market reaches around 250,000 patients per year, which is a very important TAM for phage, but also for PHAXIAM positioning. In this context, PHAXIAM is clearly positioned as a global phage therapy leader, and our strong competitive position relies on strong strategic assets. First of all, a large phage portfolio for the most critical bacterial infection, covering around 70% of severe resistant infection incidents. Moreover, a strong competitive edge in clinical development, and more specifically in what we call PJI, prosthetic joint infection, our lead indication, in which we are about to initiate the Gloria study that you probably know, the first global US-Europe 100-patient phase 2 in phage therapy, giving to PHAXIAM a first-to-market advantage. In addition to this, a large package of promising clinical data in hard-to-treat population, more than 120 patients treated in real-life compassionate use, de-risking our clinical strategy. Over the past years, PHAXIAM has also established strong relationships with European and US phage KOLs and physicians, and with the most important regulatory authorities in Europe and in the US. You know, as an example, of course, EMA, FDA now, but also NSM in France, the PEI in Germany, MHRA in UK, the Spanish agency, many agencies in Europe. And PHAXIAM has also developed strong integrated capabilities, robust capabilities in research and in development, in manufacturing, as we are able to manufacture GMP phages, which is very strategic for clinical development, and as well as a proprietary centralized phagogram, a CE-marked IVD solution, which is key to be in a position to propose individualized treatment to patients or confirm the relevance of any medicinal product. As a conclusion, PHAXIAM has a very strong competitive position in phage therapy on which to rely. In this overall context of increasing severe resistant infections, we are witnessing a growing demand from physicians for phage, opening the option for a complementary market access business model. Today, PHAXIAM has been currently conducting clinical development under the standard medicinal product regulatory framework that you probably know, leading to market access after a proper market authorization. And it's what we call the phage therapy medicinal products, or PTMP concept, strongly supported by regulatory agencies, among which, of course, EMA and FDA. And in this PTMT model, using only GMP drug product, the compassionate use scheme is a specific regulatory framework according to which physicians in Europe and in the US can have access free of charge to innovative, not yet registered GMP product, with a specific exception in France, where EEC, which stands for Authorization for Compassionate Access, are 100% reimbursed. But from now on, a new and important evolution has been occurring and triggers the opportunity of a concurrent and complementary market access business model that we call the individualized phage treatment model, or IPT. And as a matter of fact, there is a very strong demand from physicians resulting from this increasing severe resistant infection in a context in which, one, no registered treatment are yet available, and two, promising phage real-life clinical data have been already generated within this compassionate use scheme mainly. And this IPT model refers to an official regulatory framework, as such named patient programs, according to which physicians can prescribe therapeutic treatments without yet obtaining specific market authorization. There are specific conditions attached to this model. First, the use of GMP raw material. Second, this medicinal product have to be prepared at the hospital pharmacy according to a magistral preparation or compounding defined as any medicinal product prepared in a pharmacy in accordance with a medical prescription from a physician for an individual patient. The value of this regulatory framework for PHAXIAM is that in that situation, GMP phage could be sold to be used for magistral preparation. The coexistence of this PTMP and IPT regulatory framework mirrors those already implemented in the allergen therapeutic domain, integrating concurrently one, clinical development toward market authorization for allergen responsible for common allergy, but also second, allergen bulk mixtures prepared for a single individual patient, for patients whose allergies cannot be treated with alternative authorized allergen products. And this benchmark is for us very relevant and similar to what happens for allergen. It's why we anticipate that these two models, PTMP and IPT, will coexist in different European countries. And as a consequence, in this new context, PHAXIAM has two main strategic objectives. First of all, capitalize on its first mover advantage in the strategically important emerging IPT model. And here we anticipate the business development can start as soon as 2026, after a one-year preparation in 25, consisting mainly in getting national regulatory validation and preparing adapted sales and distribution organization. In 2026, we will first target the 10 largest hospitals in Europe in the relevant countries like Germany, UK, France, Italy, maybe Nordic. Hospital network to be progressively extended to a network of around 100 hospitals covered in 2030, with a potential of around 1,000 patients treated in 2027 in around 30 hospitals. The second objective is, of course, to leverage on its existing capabilities in the PTMT model to secure a potential conditional marketing approval by H2 27. And this is precisely the objective of the Gloria study about to be initiated in Q1 next year, as you know, in the US and in Europe. The clinical readout of this trial is expected around Q3 26, leading to a potential conditional market approval mid-27. Being open to this IPT model, PHAXIAM is adapting its strategy to take advantage to this new business opportunity. And now I'm handing over to Pascal.
Thank you,
Please,
Thibaut.
Pascal.
So PHAXIAM has a strong clinical development and market access capabilities in the PTMP model. And this is important from a regulatory perspective, since regulatory authorities, FDA and EMA in particular, they have regularly reiterated their request to see robust randomized clinical trials to grant full market approval for phage therapy. In this respect, PHAXIAM has initiated or will soon initiate clinical trials targeting the three main pathogens responsible of severe infections. So with Staphylococcus aureus, in prostatic joint infection, there is an ongoing pilot study called PhagoDAIR, and there will be a global proof of concept phase 2 study called Gloria, planned to start early next year, and which has already obtained clearance from the FDA. Both these PGI studies are targeting large hospitals and key opinion leaders network in US and in Europe. There is also an ongoing phase 1 PK and safety study in endocarditis, And finally, an investigator-sponsored study in diabetic foot ulcer indication called Phagopier, which is expected to start recruiting soon. With Pseudomonas aeruginosa, there is another investigator-sponsored study in ventilation-assisted pneumopathies called Piofaned to be initiated. And with Escherichia coli, there is also a phase 1 safety and PK study in the indication of urinary tract infections to be initiated. Positive clinical trial results will allow to accelerate registration through conditional market access or early access in Europe and in US, leveraging on the already available real-life compassionate data. In parallel, compassionate authorization access already granted in France in the indication of osteoarticular infections due to Staphylococcus aureus and already generating revenues will be extended in the future to other bacteria like Pseudomonas aeruginosa and E. coli and other indications in order to increase sales potential. I hand over again to Thibaut.
Thank you, Pascal. New business opportunities arrive from the emergence of this individualized phage therapeutic market access model. Which are the main drivers of this model? First of all, the strong demand from physicians. They are facing, as already said, this increasing incidence of severe resistant infection, inducing morbidity, mortality, as the PTMT model cannot yet address these clinical needs, since no medicinal products are currently available. Meanwhile, and it's a very important point, there is a strong push from regulatory stakeholders for this IPT model. And of course, considering the PTMT model as a mandatory base case framework within well-conducted, randomized, controlled trials likely to demonstrate robust proof of concept. But on the top of this, they also support a complementary IPT approach and are in the process rolling it out, making a special case on bacteriophage named patient use program in the situation of critical clinical use where medicinal products cannot be used as yet available. Which are the main features of this IPT model? First, a prerequisite is to obtain a formal regulatory approval per country to be allowed to perform magistral preparation with our GMP phages, and this regulatory process is not centralized. We have, in this respect, to get approval from any agencies like ENSM, BfArM, MHRA, IFA. Then, the medicinal product has to be prepared through a magistral preparation compounding with GMP phages or GMP phage raw materials within an hospital pharmacy and prescribed by a dedicated physician. The medicinal product preparation must also be based on a diagnostic test, namely our phagogram test, already CE marked as said. And finally, the selection of phage to be administered to patients will be drawn from a pre-existing GMP phage portfolio that PHAXIAM has developed. PHAXIAM will target as a first priority European countries familiar with magistral preparation, which is a prerequisite to this model. And as a whole, we see a general interest for phage use in Europe coming from the physician. But magistral preparation and compounding practices are more well spread in Northern Europe countries. This is actually the case in Germany, in UK, in Nordic countries, in Belgium, in Netherlands. Italy will be also considered as a potential target, as magistral preparation are commonly used and a large compounding community is existing in this country. France, to a lesser extent, as EC are in place and granting access to patients, but still to be considered. Spain is today clearly a country more difficult to target and to access, as Spanish agencies more focused on the medicinal product approach. Pascal, it's up to you.
So in order to increase the awareness of phage therapy in the most important European countries and facilitate the IPT commercial uptake, PHAXIAM has identified more than 30 sites for the Gloria clinical trial in several large hospitals in the most important European countries, as presented in the slide. The objective will be then to promote the IPT model in all these Gloria clinical sites open in Europe. I will then hand over to Jérôme, who will present the practical way to deliver IPT model.
Thank you, Pascal. So let's explore together how we will make it possible. Thanks to its ready-to-be-delivered GMP phages, PHAXIAM will be able to deliver products to the key reference hospitals within 2 days, and having a medicinal product ready to be administered the next day to the patient. This is also made possible thanks to the proprietary development of our IVD testing solution, as initially detailed by Thibaut, called phagogram. Patient strain will be tested at day 1 to confirm the susceptibility of GMP phages, and then, thanks to the robust supply chain process, it will allow PHAXIAM to provide with phages in key reference hospitals as soon as 2026. For doing that, and to be successful in the supply chain of GMP raw material phages, PHAXIAM will capitalize on its strengths and expertise and implement following action plan. First, we will obtain local regulatory approvals in different targeted European countries, then extend the European network for key reference hospitals, leveraging on major KOL and clinical sites already involved in ongoing clinical trials. And finally, set up local supply chain and diagnosis capabilities to be more efficient and closer to the patient. The main value drivers are for this IPT the following. We are expecting an average selling price of 20 euros per treatment. In the first years, the payment will be done at local levels. At the levels of the hospital within innovative treatments local envelopes, or at regional levels for some countries, such as Germany or Italy. And then also finally, this is the second step for HTA, payer. Negotiation will be initiated to support more robust reimbursement process. Thibaut?
Thank you, Jérôme. PTMP and the IPT models are clearly complementary and synergistic market channels with largely overlapping requirements. As a matter of fact, we can leverage on several strategic capabilities that can be simultaneously used for these two models. First of all, the large phage registry, considering that for the IPT model, we need a phage portfolio extended to a minimum of 30 to 35 phage, covering the 7 most important pathogens. Second, for sure, the GMP manufacturing status, as we need mandatory GMP phages for magistral preparation and also for medicinal product. Then the numerous interaction with KOL, physicians, hospitals coming from the current compassionate use program, but also ongoing and future clinical trials that we are conducting. As just explained by Pascal, we will open 45 clinical sites within the Gloria study, in which investigators and physicians are natural phage users and on which we will naturally leverage to develop this IPT model. Another synergy between both models relates as well to the strong interaction established with regulatory bodies at national level, European level, but also beyond with the FDA. Finally, our diagnostic solution, our CE-marked phagogram, currently used for EEC and compassionate use program and our trials, can be easily implemented for the IPT model with very marginal additional validation activities. And it's clear that all the energies are significantly reducing the overall requirements to develop and scale up this IPT model and any associated cash out and resource allocation requirements. For a final slide, I would like to conclude this presentation. Owing to this development strategy, PHAXIAM should more seen now as a pan-European emerging specialty pharma in critical care. A specialty pharma as being a fully integrated platform company from research to development, integrating GMP manufacturing capabilities, including diagnostic capabilities in place, a strong network with the physician and hospital, strong relationships with regulatory bodies, and still market access capabilities to be developed. Related business assumptions rely on following objectives. First, regarding the IPT model, the objectives are out of a targeted addressable market of 250,000 patients in Europe. First, objective to treat around 1,000 patients from 30 hospitals in 2027 in selected most important European countries with a potential of 20 million euro revenues. And second, later on, to treat between 7,000 to 8,000 patients in 2030, coming from around 100 hospitals, representing conservatively only around 3% of the European phage targeted addressable market, with a larger potential of 150 million euros at that time. As for the PTMT model, the objectives are first to increase the EC revenues in France to reach around 4 million euros in 2027 by obtaining, as mentioned by Pascal, other approvals beyond PGI. I remind that we are filing for a new EC early next year with Pseudomonas. And second, regarding this PTMT model, to obtain conditional market approval in H2 27 based upon Gloria clinical readout revenues with a potential amount to around 8 million euro in 27 and to reach 90 to 100 in 2030 once the product will also be launched in the US. We don't have to forget also that on the top of PGI clinical development, we could anticipate also other clinical indications to be added in terms of revenues beyond 2029. PHAXIAM strategy is really to rely on these two commercial pillars, both of them generating potential revenue superior to 100 million euro, and first, de-risking mutually one to another, and second, forming together a self-reinforcing virtuous cycle for phage therapy. PHAXIAM has to be seen more as a specialty pharma, and based on all this development assumption, PHAXIAM can reach operating profitability and positive free cash flow in 2027, which is a major inflection point for our company. We have now completed this presentation, and I'm handing over to the Dr. Robert Sebbag, infectiologist at La Pitié-Salpétrière in Paris, who is to moderate the panel. And afterward, we'll be pleased to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you, Thibaut, and good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon to my dear colleagues. Now we will start our round table. I think just to start and before to come back to my colleagues, in our daily activity as an infectiologist in La Pitié-Salpétrière, I'm a medical doctor, infectiologist, we face very critical cases with many resistant infection, and we have to try some solution because very often we speak about life and death of people. It's why we need to find solutions. Research on antibiotics is important, but it's not enough, and we know that the costs are very important one.
Perhaps I will introduce my colleagues here for them to share our experience and also to try to see what is the critical need for IPT, individualized phage therapy in Europe. Okay, the first panel is my colleague, Dr. Antonia Scobie. You are a medical doctor, infectiologist, Royal Free London National Health Service Foundation Trust in London. Second one, my dear colleague also, Dr. Volker Alt, medical doctor, director and chairman of Department of Trauma Surgery University Medical Center in Germany, and also you know very well about PGI, prosthesis joint infection, and also Dr. Truong-Thanh, medical doctor, infectiologist in Geneva, in Switzerland. As you know, France, UK, Germany, and Swiss, and perhaps we'll see exactly what is the situation in Europe. As I told you, in our daily activity, we face some very concern with some resistance, and we have no solution. It's why to have a phage therapy medical product, I know that the process of registration is long. It takes time, but in the meantime, we need some solution. It's why the approach of individualized phage therapy in Europe, not only, is something very important. Dr. Antonia Scobie, it will be very nice to have your advice on that. What is your need in your activity in London as an infectiologist? I give you the floor.
Thank you. So, yeah, I work as an infectious disease consultant in both general infectious diseases, but also my specialist area is in prosthetic joint infection. So there is definitely for implant infection where we have no curative surgical options beyond very life-altering surgery or surgery that carries a very high mortality. There is definitely a significant clinical need and interest among our infectious disease cohort to access phage therapy for these patients. Trying to evaluate the numbers becomes quite difficult. So in the UK, we do have surveillance systems. So our public health agency, our UK Health Security Agency, will monitor the rate of certain infections with certain pathogens, so mainly the escape pathogens that were mentioned earlier, but also certain groups of surgical infections, so prosthetic joint infections or surgical site infections will routinely get monitored on a national basis. So we do have an idea of the number of very resistant serious infections, so bloodstream infections sits, I think in the last year it was just over 66,000 multi-drug resistant infections. But also for the prosthetic joint infections, we have a national registry, which doesn't include all patients, but we have at least 2,500 patients on our prosthetic joint infection registry. So we know that there is a significant need. The difficulties we have accessing it has sort of prevented being able to treat as many patients as we feel need it. But trying to evaluate the exact number of patients who have been considered for phage therapy is difficult for some of the other indications like urinary tract infection, diabetic foot infection, for example.
Dr. Antonia, just to go a little further for you, what could be the process in your hospital, in your activity, to have the access for an IPT treatment?
So the regulations in the UK are slightly different to other countries. So at the moment, if we wanted to access phage treatment, a UK produced phage would need to be made to GMP. We have been able to import non-GMP phages, but what we've had to do is import from other countries. So we have used phage therapy for patients from Belgium and from the US, but very small numbers. And we've treated one patient in our institution in the last few weeks with phage therapy, but we've had to go through a number of approval systems from our local hospitals, from ethics committees, and from our regulators, the MHRA, to import and agree to use the phage. So there is a process, but there is no framework at the moment for non-GMP or compassionate use phages, but we're trying to work with the regulators to develop it. And there was a recent recommendation from a parliamentary inquiry that took place last year in the UK on the potential of antibacterial phages. So a group of parliamentarians published a document which is available online recommending changes to the UK regulatory frameworks to have access to individualized treatment as well as GMP phages from a clinical trial perspective.
And the need of a phagogram will be important for you to have the diagnostic. I think it's something very important for us. To know the efficacy in vitro before to go in vivo with the patient.
Yes, absolutely. So for the patients who have received treatment, they've all had phage susceptibility testing. So that has involved sending the isolate, the strain, off to the respective international laboratory that has provided, or the institution that's provided the phage. So that's either been the US or Belgium. But we are also our public health body, so UKHSA, are also looking at ways to be able to perform susceptibility testing in the UK, but that's definitely a need that we have is quick access to phagogram susceptibility testing.
Okay, Dr. Antonia will come back later for perhaps some other comments or other questions. I give the floor to my colleague and Dr. Volker Alt. The first question, how do you evaluate in your countries the needs for phage therapy to treat various kinds of severe resistant infection? And after we'll come back perhaps on IPT or PTMT.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you very much, Robert, for the introduction and the question. And I can definitely confirm what Antonia had said before. Also in Germany, we see a high need for alternative treatment of complex bone and joint infections. This is mainly for patients with periprosthetic joint infections, but also for fracture-related infections, but also for spinal infections that we see from the musculoskeletal point of view. Particularly for multi-drug resistant infections, we sometimes cannot treat them by established antibiotics anymore, and we need new alternatives for this. But also on the other side, and this has been touched by Antonia before too, we know that we can heal the infection when we change the implants for patients that suffer from periprosthetic joint infections. But sometimes the prostheses are very, very difficult to remove. It requires a really heavy surgery for patients. And we see patients with periprosthetic joint infections that get older and older, and they do not tolerate heavy surgery anymore. And therefore, we would like to retain the implant and do less surgery and to have an additional tool that helps us to retain the implant.
Yes,
also for this indication, I believe that phage therapy can be a very, very helpful tool to control the infection. I mean, in most cases, we will not be able to eradicate the infection, but we might be able to suppress the infection and to control the infection. But can do a very, very limited amount of surgery without removal or exchanging big prostheses, because this is very heavy for patients. And therefore, I think this is also a very, very important part that the phage therapy could play, because when we talk about periprosthetic joint infections, we do not only talk about the local infection. We know that this is associated with a significantly elevated risk for mortality in those patients, and this needs to be kept in mind too. And therefore, I'm pretty sure that all colleagues that treat complex bone and joint infections, they see a high clinical need for alternative strategies, including phage therapy.
It's very important what you say, Alt. And patient is not only one pathogen, and very often we have the comorbidity where it's impossible to come back on surgery with the risk with this type of people. Just one question, Alt. What is the regulatory framework for you in Germany to use IPT therapy, individual phage therapy, regulatory framework, production of GMP, phage GMP, phagogram, and so on? What is your approach in Germany for that?
Yeah, to be honest, we do not really have a good framework for this. the official answers.
This one.
Yeah, so we are allowed to use phages in terms of compassionate use.
Yes.
But then it should be GMP phages, which are difficult to obtain. We have treated 5 patients with complex periprosthetic joint and fracture-related infections over the last 2 years. And all 5, or only one of them, has received GMP phages. For the non-GMP phages, we have to have a very, very good explanation for the indication why we use it, because these were cases where the only alternative was amputation. So we could justify the use of phages, but in general, the framework is also difficult, and we would have to use GMP-like phages, but there are only a very, very few options to obtain GMP phages, and therefore it is very, very difficult right now to build up reliable phage therapy for Germany with the existing regulations.
We'll come back perhaps later about the contribution of PHAXIAM for the production of GMP phages. And what, just to finish this question, I will come back a little later. What about the phagogram in Germany? Because you need this diagnostic and to check really the efficacy of the phage according to the bacteria, to the germs you find.
Yeah. So, as I said, the regulatory process is not established, so I would not have to show a phagogram, but I want to show a phagogram. I also want to be sure that the phages that I'm using are effective against the causative strains, and therefore for me, when I consider to use phages, I want to see a phagogram that shows me the effectiveness of the phages against the causative microorganisms.
Okay, thank you, Art. I will come back perhaps to my colleague from Switzerland, Dr. Truong. Same questions. How do you evaluate in Switzerland the need for phage therapy to treat resistance that we face very often, severe resistant infections? And after we'll come back on IPT.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Only by screen, but perhaps later we'll have the opportunity to meet all together, a face-to-face meeting. Dr. Truong, please, don't speak Spanish.
So I'm also an infectiologist in charge of bone and joint infection as my colleague. So I won't repeat what they told us, because I think this is a really good argument for phage therapy. Maybe one thing which was not told before is that in most cases of bone and joint infection in PJI especially, there is one bacteria. So very often this is a monomicrobial infection. So I think the phage therapy is is a very good option for PJI.
Is Staphylococcus aureus, huh?
Not really. No, not only Staph aureus, but also E. coli, Pseudomonas. And for this bacteria, we don't have so much options. So phage could be really an alternative, not an alternative, but a synergistic approach with antibiotic and with surgery. So in these cases, I think the phages could really help us to treat these patients and to help them to maintain the function of the limb, which is really what we want to do as a physician. In Switzerland, I think it is really like my colleagues. There is a lot of bone and joint infection. This is really an increasing disease because of the population which is older year on year. So I think we are going to have more bone and joint infection, more PJI in the future days, in the future years. So I think the phage could really help us to treat and to help these patients. For the regulation in Switzerland, it is not well established. For now, we don't have, we can't use phage except for compassionate use, or what we say is experimental use only. So we prefer GMP phages, of course, but we also treated patients in Geneva with phages from Belgium and from Zurich. So, of course, if we have GMP phages, we are going to ask for that, of course, but I think there is a price, and maybe we can come to this point later, but I think this is a really important thing to discuss. But of course,
I'm sorry, you need an authorization in the hospital only, or you need authorization in the national level?
No, because for the moment, if you think there is really a need for this treatment, you have to have the authorization, of course, of the hospital, from the director, the medical director, from the pharmacist, and from the cantonal pharmacist, so the Geneva pharmacist. But there is no need for Swissmedic to know that we are going to treat patients, because there is the responsibility is from the physician who administered the treatment.
Okay. And what about the phagogram, as I asked to our colleagues?
Of course, as it is an individualized treatment, I really think that the phagogram is essential for phage therapy. I don't think we can treat. Of course, there is some phages like the Staph aureus that you have, that PHAXIAM has, which we know that there is a 95% of susceptibility against all the strains. But if you fall in the 5% of resistance, of course, I would prefer to have the phagogram before administer the phages.
For sure. It's why the presence of the phagogram is a level of the pharmacist. The pharmacy by hospitals could be something very important. And I will talk later about the contribution of PHAXIAM, if they can answer to this type of things. Just perhaps you want to add something, Dr. Truong, let me know. Huh?
No, it's okay.
It's okay. Just to come back, and before to go to my last question, Dr. Antonia, in UK, where is the level of authorization? Is department by department, hospital by hospital, in a regional level? I think it's very important for IPT, for sure. I speak about IPT.
So if we are importing any product, the authorization has to come through the national regulator, even if it's GMP, but it's unlicensed. So there would be a national level of agreement. Usually it's a notification that we are doing it and they don't object. So it's a complicated, there's a complicated answer, because if it's not a licensed treatment that is recommended by our national body, so we have a body called NICE, which is National Institute for Clinical Excellence, to make recommendations on treatment. So anything that is recommended and endorsed by NICE doesn't need approval. But if it is an unlicensed treatment, it would need approval on a local level. But that would be it. So, but if we were expecting it to be paid within our health, within our hospital or health body, then depending on the cost, it would need to be nationally approved. So it depends on the cost of the treatment and whether it's licensed or unlicensed, and GMP and non-GMP, if that makes sense.
Okay, just for the authorization and regulatory framework, we can see that the regulatory department, EMA, FDA, for PTMP as a drug for medical treatment, they built a process. They recognize the use and something is clear. For IPT, we can see that it's by hospital, by region, is not something well established. It's awareness of the infectiologist to say, okay, and what is very important and mandatory is for sure is a GMP phage. If I want to clarify a little this question of authorization for ELPT, and perhaps with you, Antonia, and I will come back to also the other colleagues. According to you, everything we heard about your activity, what are the challenges and what PHAXIAM's special contribution in developing an individualized phage therapy to patients, for sure?
Yeah, so I mean the challenge,
globally speaking.
Yeah, so I mean the challenges are getting all the authorization, but also accessing phagogram testing and delivery of the product, and the challenges of where the product will be compounded and the logistics. So having gone through the process with Belgium, and also we sent the same for the same patient to PHAXIAM, I mean, we were able to get a result very quickly through our testing through PHAXIAM, and we know that the strain was sensitive. So I think having a GMP product for an individualized use will make a big difference to the amount of approvals and that we need from a local level. So I think that there is a significant, role of having access to those products. We will still need some approval and regulatory, checks that it meets the criteria for what's considered safe. But I think there is a huge potential to being able to access these treatments without having to deal with the amount of bureaucracy to deal with, a non-GMP phage. I think it will be significantly easier to access for patients in the UK.
Thank you. Same question for you, Alt.
Yes, also for me, it would be a tremendous improvement in my practice, because with GMP phages, I could significantly improve my arguments for phage therapy, because as I said before, we are allowed to do phage, individualized phage therapy, but only with GMP phages. If I could use GMP phages for IPT, this would be a tremendous improvement for me and for my patients.
Dr. Truong, you told us already, but you can come back of this.
Yeah, I think like my colleagues,
to help you.
It would be easier with the GMP phages, of course. I think it is the same as my colleagues.
Because in France now, we'll discuss IPT is not something so easy that in your country, in France, for example, they accept compassionate cases, but it's not clear about magistral preparation for IPT, but we can discuss, because it's a recognition of the use of phages. Okay, I thank you very much, my dear colleague, and perhaps some question will appear for the people in front of us. Please, I open the floor for the question for you, for me. We will see who can answer to the question. The floor is open for questions.
Yes, thank you, Robert, for your time and for this panel sharing, and I would like also to thank you all the KOLs today. Dushan, I mean, we're open to any question for both KOLs, but also for the management, if any.
Yes, of course. Thank you for this very insightful discussion. And we have some first questions coming from our participants. The first one is the following. What about combination of phage therapy and antibiotics approach? Does phage therapy exclude the use of antibiotics?
Yeah, maybe I can.
Alt, you want to answer? You have a large experience in PGI, or Antonia, or Truong, about the combination of antibiotics and phage therapy for the first question.
It is always a combination of antibiotics and phages. We have seen that the effectiveness of phages is much better when we use them in combination with antibiotics. And also for me in surgery, when I use the phages, I always use systemic, but also local antibiotics to have the maximum that I can use local with the phages and the local antibiotics plus systemic therapy. And also a lot of in vivo and in vitro studies show that the phages are much more effective when they are combined with antibiotics. So the phages will not be able to replace the antibiotics. We need a treatment of antibiotics plus the phages.
And perhaps we can add that in the design of a clinical study for PTMP also is sometimes, in some cases, use of a mixture of antibiotics and phage therapy. More questions? Or somebody, Antonia, Dr. Antonia, or Dr. Truong, if you want to complete the first question about use of antibiotics and same time of use of phages.
I mean, I just agree with what Professor Alt said, that essentially it would be in combination. I think we see this very much as an adjunct to existing therapies, but you know, there is a lot of work and interest going on in the combination and the effect of synergy with some antibiotics as well, that potentially you can get even you know, better killing effects of the bacteria. And sometimes the use of phage therapy has actually changed some of the antibiotic resistance profile in some bacteria, so actually has rendered an antibiotic strain a bit more susceptible to antibiotics by treating with phage. So there are definitely positives, you know, to combining it with antibiotics.
Okay, Jean, if you have any other questions, please.
Yes, of course. So the next question is more targeted to, indeed, PHAXIAM as a company. As of today, how many people have been treated in the AAC program in France or international?
In the specific EAC program, which I repeat is osteoarticular infection due to Staphylococcus aureus, about 15 patients have been treated specifically for this indication, for this type of infection.
But we can just to complete, it's a very limited indication. Yes. You should explain, we speak about the PUT.
Yeah, we speak about osteoarticular infections due to Staphylococcus aureus. But of course, there are other patients who have been treated for other kind of infections due to Staphylococcus aureus. And the objective will be to extend to other germs like Pseudomonas aeruginosa or E. coli in the future.
If my colleagues from Germany, from UK, or from Switzerland, you have some results or some with some compassionate use of phage, please complete. The question was mainly in France. Huh?
Yes, related to EEC probably. Yushan, please.
Yes, so the next question is quite linked. Beyond PGI, so prostate joint infections, what are the main diseases or pathologies that PHAXIAM could treat in the IPT context with its current portfolio of phages?
I think that to make it clear, when we speak about the IPT model, individualized phage treatment, it's not that much driven by clinical indication. It may be very much diverse according to the specific strain required for the patient. It means that, again, in Europe, we speak about 250 patients as a targeted addressable population for any kind of severe resistant infection. Pascal, would you like to complete a bit?
No, exactly. The question is severe infections, not well controlled by standard of care, and including the phages which are available from PHAXIAM, that is Staphylococcus aureus, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, or E. coli. So it's
just to complete, in my clinical activity, very often we have some urinary infection with E. coli resistant to many antibiotics, and I think individual phage therapy will be something very useful. And it's a lot of cases in urinary infection in my department.
Yes, there are really a lot of indications. Also, other clinical disciplines, for example, in cardiac surgery, all the cardiac all the implants that are used in vascular surgery, the stents, also in orthopedic surgery, as I said, the periprosthetic joint infections, but not only, also spinal infections in the cervical spine, where you cannot have a lot of surgery. And there's really a huge clinical field that could benefit from phage therapy.
And just to add to that, I mean, we have a increasing transplant cohort of people that have had transplants and are immunosuppressed, that have chronic infections, particularly lung infections, there's definitely a role for that in the sort of cystic fibrosis cohort and immunosuppressed patients, as well as diabetic foot infections. There's also a significant need. So there are a good number of indications needing this kind of treatment.
Food also.
Thank you. Dushan, please, if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Reg. Yes, we have a couple of them. So the next one is regarding the pricing of IPT treatments. You mentioned in your presentation the price of something like 20 or 25,000 euros on the average in Europe. Who will be the final payer for it, or is it charged to the patient directly?
The question relates specifically to IPT or MTMP model?
IPT.
Oh, IPT, yes. Again, it's very important that IPT model is related to magistral preparation, and different systems in Europe seek to include magistral preparation in the overall budget of hospital or insurance system, with a priority given to the case where commercial products are not yet available. And the cases are different. You know, I would say that in UK or Germany, there are more centralized mechanism and integrated approach, whereas, for instance, in Italy or in Spain, in Switzerland, they are more, regionalized. And as mentioned, with hospital budget, but also regional budget, be allocated to the funding of this magistral preparation. It means that we have to adapt according to the specificity of the countries. But what you have to understand that this magistral preparation are taking into account with specific payment system.
Thank you. The next questions is linked to the capacity of PHAXIAM to supply the phages and to support this acceleration in demand due to IPT treatments across Europe. How this is handled inside the company?
Here there are two aspects for me in the answer. I mean, first the diversity of the portfolio. As mentioned during the presentation, we have to cover this SKP pathogen at minimum the 7 most important pathogen with a minimum portfolio of 35 GMP phages. And here, we are already discussing with partners to be in a position to extend as soon as possible this portfolio. Currently, we are working on 3 pathogens and developing a 4th one. That's the first aspect. Then the second aspect of the answer is supply in terms of manufacturing. Here we have no specific limitation in the GMP phage manufacturing. We are currently supplying our phage that are GMP, and here I don't see any significant constraints in terms of capacity in itself.
Yes, Thibaut, sorry, but according to the discussion we have with my colleague from different countries, you will ensure the GMP. We have seen there's a key word for phages, and to use IPT is GMP phages. And I see the key point, the production and to have the access to GMP phages to the portfolios that you described before.
But you are right, Robert, that amongst the different phage players, there are not so many currently able to provide with GMP phages, which is one of the assets that we have so far.
The added value is very important.
For sure.
To answer to this very important concern. Okay, thank you.
Dushan, please.
Yes, thank you very much. We have another question regarding the impact of this IPT approach on your clinical development. How does this impact the Gloria phase 3 study? It's not the phase 3, sorry, it's phase 2 normally. Just a small correction for our participants. So has any impact on the study, and how do you will finance this study given the IPT approach?
Yeah, I will first answer from a clinical perspective. It is very clear that the priority and this is true for all agencies, and they made it very clear, is that a patient with an indication for phage therapy, the priority is to participate to a clinical trial if a clinical trial is available and the inclusion and exclusion criteria are in agreement with the profile of a patient. So that's the priority. It's only if a patient cannot enter into a clinical trial that IPT aspect can be considered for this particular patient. Concerning the financing, I hand over to Thibaut to answer the question.
Yes, that's another aspect of the answer. As already presented during the webinar, we consider that due to the synergies between these two models, there are limited additional cash out resources to be spent. We consider in a way to be able to position in a country, we will have marginal additional fixed costs and probably more variable costs to be considered, as we are potentially considering outsourcing, part of the local supply chain, technical, commercial resources. We should potentially set up a kind of dedicated local or regionalized phagogram solution. But, financially speaking, we don't see the development as an IPT model as, requiring significantly additional fixed costs. That's why, that was the purpose during the presentation. We explained why there are so many synergies between these two models. And it's why we can leverage on the capabilities that we have established for the MTMP model.
Thank you, Thibaut. This was the last question so far, so I remind our participants that they can ask questions in written through the chat system that is at the bottom of their screen. No further questions.
Okay, thank you, Dushan. That's why I think it's time to move maybe to the conclusion. Just coming back to, to the slide. Yes, just to conclude, I would like to come back on key few messages. First of all, millions of patients experience every year unresolved resistant bacteria, difficult to treat infection. And facing this critical medical need, there is a strong and increasing demand from KOL and physicians for phage therapy all over the world. And I think it was confirmed by the panel that we had today. Concurrently with the classical clinical development pathway that PHAXIAM has been conducting for years now, the PTMP model, regulatory authorities like EMA have opened the market for an individualized phage therapy model, which is a major change for physician and patient, a major opportunity. These two models, as demonstrated, PTMP and IPT are very complementary and synergetic one to another, implying that they can be managed and developed by PHAXIAM with limited additional resources. Strategically, PHAXIAM will greatly benefit from these two complementary commercial pillars. IPT will, with large potential revenues, will secure potentially short-term revenues over the period of 26 to 2030 in the first horizon. PTMP, with already existing EEC revenues to be increased over time, will then generate potential revenues starting in H2 27, subject to the conditional market approval for the PGI Gloria development. Then we could also anticipate the PTMP model to relay the IPT model when more medicinal product will be registered in different clinical indications. But these two models form together a self-reinforcing virtuous cycle for phage therapy. First of all, commercial success in IPT will help finance PTMP programs and facilitate uptake of future approved medicinal products. And secondly, success or clinical validation that we all expect in PTMP will help broaden clinical and market acceptance of IPT in areas not yet addressable by PTMP. And it is strategically very important because PHAXIAM is probably the only player in the field having the capabilities to develop and succeed in these two approaches. Based on this overall strategy, PHAXIAM is targeting to reach positive free cash flow and profitability from 2027.
Okay, Thibaut, let me thank my colleagues for the participation to this roundtable. Dr. Antonia, Alt, Dr. Truong, thank you very much. And I was happy also to share the needs for IPT and for phage therapy, globally speaking. And I think it's a common concern with all my colleagues. Antibiotics alone now is not enough in face of some very resistant infections. Thank you very much again, and perhaps see you later in a congress, in another meeting, not through a screen, but perhaps face-to-face meeting. Bye-bye, good luck.
Okay.
And thank you again.
Robert, thank you very much for having me.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And
Thank you.
I thank you for your attention and your availability today for this webinar. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. You may now disconnect.